Kelly, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Good. Landing on a Thursday, which is always a good feeling towards the end of the week. But yeah, I'm doing well. I'm excited to kind of dive into some interesting topics that I know both of us have a lot of views on. So yeah,
We definitely do.
excited.
The way that I always start is typically give you an opportunity to give us a bit of an overview of who you are and what you've been doing throughout your career. Then hopefully we can dive into those topics that you mentioned. So over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'll try and be succinct. It's been a while now, my career. Yes, I started in HR like a lot of people, which is not really planning it. I went to university, did business, and as part of that, I got to do a year in industry. And it just so happened that the role that I got was in an HR team.
Yeah.
But it kind of started very differently. It wasn't a generalist role. It was more of a project-based role on an ERP implementation, which actually back then I didn't realize was actually an amazing start because it allowed me to see the full kind of like spectrum of what HR was all about, just from a really transactional point of view around process and you know all the different things that we are responsible for in a business. And my career kind of took that route. After I graduated, I went into kind of systems projects, data, kind of support roles, I guess, for an HR function, and you know bringing data to life and all of those different things. Which again, like I loved that. I actually look back and think, who was that person? Because now I love data, but I'm not like into like bringing it all together. I love kind of analyzing it. So I did that for a few years in London, worked in professional services in a law firm, did that for 6 years, and then that brought me out here to Dubai, again, kind of coincidentally. And I was out here for 3 months on a secondment, and I fell in love with Dubai. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it was a turning point, turning 30, etc. And I was like, oh, I reckon I could live here. And so I looked for roles, and I was fortunate to get my next role with Johnson Controls, which was, again, another kind of pivotal part of my career, like completely different to what I was used to. American, obviously, HQ, moving to the Middle East. Like there were just so many changes in that role that, again, I look back and I was like, why did you do that? It was just like chaotic. But again, I did it, and I was in my comp and ben systems role for about a year and a half, and my manager at the time, Sarah, who I am eternally grateful to, asked me just a really simple question. She was like, do you want to stay in a specialist role or do you want to be a generalist? And I was like, good question. And it made me think. And I think if she hadn't asked me that question, I probably would have stayed in specialist because I just wouldn't have thought. I would have just taken that route naturally. But at the time, I realized I didn't want to stay in large corporates. And in order to enable a path out of corporates, I knew that specialism wasn't the way.
Why that? Why not large corporates anymore?
I think it was my ambitious mind at that time. I didn't want to stay in a large corporate because I just felt like a small fish. And at the time, I just was hungry and I wanted more. And it was great learning, but I just wanted to be able to have more influence and decision-making power. Whereas in large corporates, that's really tricky at the level I was at. And also we weren't HQ. That could probably be a whole podcast in itself, like satellite offices versus HQ. And so for all of those reasons, I decided I wanted to be in a more generalist role. And again, luckily at that time, there was a generalist role at JCI. And so that's when I made the change. And then I did that for another 4 years. And then the next big change came, which was moving out of corporate. So I'd done the generalist business partnering. I'd also done shared service there. So again, a great kind of learning ground for me. And I'm, again, very grateful for it. And then the role with the entertainer came up, which was another... I feel like every role that I've taken has been like a little notch on like why I am where I am. And for me, that was like stepping out of corporate, reporting into a CEO, smaller business, most senior HR person, tech, digital. They were just coming to the end of their digital transformation, and founder-led still in the organization. And so for all of those reasons, and not least the brand name in this part of the world, it was like super exciting for me. And I had the best 2 years there. It was such a safe and enjoyable way to make that step out of both corporate and, you know, a very deep HR structure where now I was just the one that should have all the answers. So I did that. And then from then it's just been the love of tech and startups.
Yeah.
And, I've had many different experiences around that, from like the entertainer going through a buyout. My next role was with a corporate well-being company who, again, like I learned so much from being right in and thick of it, and doing less HR probably than I imagined, but learning probably way more than I imagined about business, about startups, about people, about taking people on that journey in the very beginning. And then after Level, I went to Tabby, which again, don't have to explain too much about Tabby, doing amazing in the region. And again, like that was a change for me, going into a business that was flying and, well-established, growth trajectory through the roof, and working with super smart people. And fintech, never done fintech. And so, still booming, but at the time it was super booming, that topic. And, working with Sam and Daniel was, amazing for me. And then towards the end of my role at Tabby, I got approached again for the current role that I'm in. Again, fintech, but moving from B2C to B2B. Completely different dynamic, LATAM, emerging markets, US headquartered, all of these things kind of like sparked my interest. That's where I am today. And throughout each of those roles, like I said, like the learnings have been way better than I could ever learn in a book or in a classroom or, through chats. And so I think that's always been the reason why I've taken on different challenges, because I could see the opportunity there. And like I said, most of the time you don't learn more about HR, you just learn more about people. And that's what enables you to do your role better.
Absolutely. And I can't thank you enough for an intro like that. That gives me 13 or 14 different segues that I'm just trying to pick up where we can actually go towards now, right? Because you just dropped so many very good points in that intro. One I'd like to start with is your transition from corporate to the sort of more startup world. It's not for everyone, right? Typically, like you are either a corporate person or you are always born to be in that sort of startup ecosystem, right? Very rarely do you see those transitions work out well, but for you it has. Like you've had really good jobs with some amazing brands in the tech space. What was that real sort of trigger outside of the influence, and how did you actually handle those first few months in that transition of being inside a big monster, a beast, and then working in a business where you're probably asked to do a lot more things that are way out of your JD?
Yeah. So I think what spurred the transition was I was always that like kind of rebel, I guess, in a corporate, where I'm like, oh gosh, why do we have to do it like that? But we don't, and we can't do it like that here. Like that's just copy paste, and that doesn't work.
Did you struggle in those roles where you're just butting heads with people with all the rigidness and so forth?
I did. And I would love to meet some people that don't in an HR role, because I think it's not a transactional role. Like, you can't just take a policy and just like, brush it over every country in the world. You just can't do it. And so, I really struggled with that whole like we're a global company. Yeah, but you have to think locally as well. Like you have to apply things locally, like have a global vision and strategy, but like apply and execute locally. And a lot of globals don't know how to do that. So I was just itching to kind of like get that rebel out of me, just to have some free thought, I think, around things. But how was the transition? I'm not going to sit here and say it was brilliant and, all that corporate malarkey are left behind and it was great. It wasn't. Actually, I would challenge anyone that goes from corporate to not miss corporate for just a little bit.
Did you second guess yourself?
Yeah, of course. Like you second guess yourself. You don't know how you can survive without that structure, to be honest with you. There was a lot of my daily was like, you don't do what? Like, and sorry, you what? You don't, it was just a minefield of things that just weren't there, that were such crutches for me in my last role. But I think the key to the kind of like change is just working out like neither is perfect. Like the startup world is chaotic and it's painful sometimes and it's mind-blowing, and so is corporate. And I think taking the best parts from both is what keeps you sane and actually enables you to make that transition in the best way, actually. Like, I know companies, and I'm sure you've done it, I know I've done it, like hiring people from corporates is a risk if they've never done it at a startup before. I've done it. I know lots of people have done it. Oh, they've worked for so and so, they'll bring all that great stuff and bring it here. It's like, yeah, but you don't realize how much of that is them. And they don't know how to operate here. And so I think timing of that change, like I was fairly young and in, you know, the infancy, I would say, of my career in a sense. And so I think that helped. But like, you know, people that make that transition who have been in corporates for like 15, 20 years, like hats off to them for those that do make it and enjoy it and thrive. Because I think the time that you spend in corporates, I think is pretty critical in whether that's an easy transition. So, yeah.
It's a good point because, I mean, I know a lot of founders who are almost, they've got this blanket sort of belief and statement that don't give me anyone who's worked in a corporate or who hasn't worked in a startup. And coming from a talent acquisition side of things, I'm just like, well, why don't we look at it as a case-by-case basis rather than just saying, you know, they just can't make the transition, right? Because there are exceptions to every rule. And with the right, probably, I would say, recruitment process where you're not only judging based on skill set, but you're also judging on values and personality and things like that. If they're all aligned, then you can make that recruit probably a lot easier to actually work for your business, right? So it is that sort of education piece with those founders in telling them it's not just, you know, the people who have, you know, the entrepreneurs from 18 and, you know, selling something in a stall to just, you know, have that sort of business acumen and so forth. You want someone who probably has a bit of an understanding about the sort of, you know, the overall sort of business sense, right?
Yeah.
And you do learn that from corporates. So when people hear me, like, sort of just talk about the passion of the startup ecosystem, they almost misunderstand it for, I hate the corporate world. I love the corporate world. Same. You know, like probably my best years in recruitment were working for corporates that were 15 billion in turnover and 10 billion in turnover. You know, and being like a small fish and struggling to sort of have a huge impact because I wanted to be a big personality and I wanted to be recognized and I wanted to change things and so forth. And yet with those big machines, there are those cogs in there that you have to just, you know, go along with and so forth. But it doesn't mean one is bad, one is good, or vice versa. And I think both founders of startups and also leaders of corporates need to understand both of that, right?
Yeah. And actually, they will do best when they have the balance. And one of the things that I don't think is easily found in only people that know how to do the startup hustle is scale. Like, I think you can get great kind of advantages from people that have been in corporate to understand that, you know, the outcome needs to be the same, but the way you do it needs to be different because you can't do that in a scaling way. But I completely agree with you. Like, I get frustrated for myself and for others that I know are looking for roles where it's like, oh no, they've never done a startup, they wouldn't cope. Well, yeah, probably 9 times out of 10 that might be true, but that one is like probably the person that's going to be one of your highest performers because it just works. So
yeah, I mean, I think back to probably 12, 13 years ago, I was lucky enough to work for a very large business, and one of the access points that I had was working with the Asia Pac CFO on my P&L all the time. So having that assessment on a quarterly basis. And prior to that, I was running a P&L. But when you say running a P&L with the other business, it was more just like I had a spreadsheet with my costs and you know, my revenue and so forth, and not really fully digging deep into how to actually run the financial side of a business. So when you work for that corporate, then all of a sudden they put you on that path to get a full understanding. That's your education that you mentioned, right? And I'm not a go to school, get 2 degrees, get an MBA kind of guy. I'll learn on the job by meeting people like yourself and so many others and learn from my job and extract whatever I can and put that into practice because that's how I learn, right? So being able to, or being exposed to these sort of contacts and these sort of processes in larger businesses has helped me run my small business now, right? So I can never shy away from that. And I don't think either the leaders in corporates or the founders in startups should either.
Yeah. I also think it's like where the power moves as well when a business grows. And I don't mean power in like an aggressive way. I just mean like decision making. Like as a founder, you have to at some point let go of that and dilute your decision making because you've hired the right people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that is often lost because there's that want to hold on to it, but also when you make the wrong hires, you're probably trusting your gut that decision making isn't there because you've hired the wrong people. And so I think being able to put those decision making powers into people that know what they're doing and have that kind of mixed experience, I think is also another way, again, coming back to the word scale.
Yeah.
It's how you do that.
Definitely. You mentioned when you made that move here and you were here for those 3 months and fell in love with the place. You mentioned the whole sort of relocation, at that stage in your life. And it's a topic that I deal with quite a lot because we do a lot of global headhunting.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just identifying these people and attracting them to a role. A lot of it falls down with the people that we have worked with in the past who don't do the sort of relocation really well, who don't do the onboarding really well. What's your view, having been here now for a while, in how businesses as a whole sort of, attract people from abroad and actually onboard them here to the region and actually help them settle?
Yeah, great question. I think the best I've seen it done and the way I try to approach it is to forget everything they want to know about the company and the role and put yourself in their shoes. They want to know where's the best place to live, like where's the best schools, what do I need to do for my family? So you almost need to step out of your like job and into them as someone that's relocating, because it is, especially when you have lived here so long, you take it for granted how easy and amazing it is to operate here. Whereas for other people who haven't been here, it looks like, a maze.
Yeah, it's chaos.
And so for me, I think that empathetic approach to, okay, I've got them over the line on the role in the business, but like, how do I get them here from a safety and, ease of getting their family over the line as well? Because that's always a big sell, like, especially if there is a family. If they're not bringing a family, it's still that like, okay, how do I make a life here? Like, what does life look like here? And so I try to make it as, personable as I can around what it really is like living here. And it isn't what you see on Instagram. You don't have to be at a beach club every weekend and, at Dubai Mall every other night or anything like that. You don't have to see the fountains once a week. Like, you can live quite a nice, easy, low profile life here if you want to. And I think being able to, turn that, Instagram life into something that's really livable. And honestly, like, I've been here for 12 years and there isn't a day where I'm like, oh, get me back to the UK or somewhere else in the world. And I think being able to meet them on that personal level, forget everything, okay, do the transactional stuff around visa and like eligibility and all of that to live here and stuff, but really sell the living of here. And, just being real, I think. Take it out of your onboarding process from a transactional perspective and just have a conversation. Ask them, tell them that they can ask you anything. No question is stupid. Like, we've all been there. Like, I remember when I moved here and just the concept of going to DWA to turn like water and electricity on was like mind blowing. But these are the little things that I'm always like, oh, and when you get here, you can't just turn the light on. You have to go and set it up and things like that. So I think, just being real about it and not making it feel like that, oh, I've told them this, I've told them that, right, they're ready to move, let's go. Like, there has to be a level of like compassion around it.
Do you think it's improved a lot from when you first got here? Do you think there's a lot more empathy in that process from what you've seen? And even for other like-minded people like yourself in the industry who hold similar titles to you, do you hear in those sort of conversations when you are networking with these people that this is a topic that they're really focusing on to improve?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a good period of time that I've been here where like relocating just like kind of stopped, and it was like regional experience. Don't want to bring people over here. The whole like expat package was so inflated at that time that actually it didn't make any sense. It was easier and more economical to move people in the country, and actually at that time there was all this talent that you had available. So I wouldn't say it's been like a theme throughout the last 12 years, but I definitely think that people are realizing it's harder now to attract that because of there isn't that expat package thing. It's not for a number of years and then you go home or anything like that. This is really like pick your life up and move it here. So I think that's been the switch in terms of like, what does going to work in Dubai look like? It means going and settling there and living there. And that's the kind of story you need to tell now, rather than come for 2 years, tax-free money,
exactly,
and then go home.
And we can't underestimate how big of a move it is, whether you're single or whether you're moving with a family. Moving abroad, combining that with starting a new job, individually they're daunting.
Yeah.
Combined, it can be very overwhelming for the strongest mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just dealing with so many different things that you're not normally dealing with.
Yeah.
Plus the longing of your normality of life back home with everything and everyone that you know. And I think companies should be best placed to be focusing on this a hell of a lot more, especially if they're targeted to actually attract people from abroad.
Definitely.
Like this should be something that should be, signed off on in a very strategic and well thought out process to make sure that you have. Why do all the work in identifying and attracting them through a recruitment process, only to let it fall down or disappoint because
expectation
you didn't put enough effort and time into that part of the process, which is still a huge part of the process.
No, and I think one thing that's I know has been used, it's not a new thing, which is just that orientation, like bringing them here. Don't let the first day at work be the first time they're in this country. Like let them come and see it and feel it and do it outside of that work environment, because I think that's super important.
Absolutely.
Even if they've been here before, like just let them come again and remember and imagine living here as opposed to just being here on holiday. And I think that's a really critical part of knowing that they're in it for the right reasons as well. Definitely.
Back on the corporate v startup, okay. What is more challenging, working for a business leader in a corporate or a founder-led business?
Definitely founder-led.
Okay, tell us why.
And for all the obvious...
And you don't have to name names.
No, I mean, when I'm a founder, I'll be that person too. I don't think it's a person thing. It's the reality of the role and what you're doing. Like, typically, I would hope if you're a founder, it's your passion. It's something that you think about every moment of the day. You want success. You can't imagine anything else. And it's yours, and that's completely different to being in a corporate. And ultimately, everything stops with you. Now, we can talk about good structures, good leadership, empowering and all of that, but ultimately it does stop with you. So that's a huge amount of pressure. Like however many employees you have, their livelihoods stop with you. Whereas in a corporate, you don't have that. So it's that human-centric piece that's the challenge. And then you just add psychology into all of that, and that's what makes it harder, because it's thinking about other people all the time is really hard. Putting other people first is really hard. Thinking about how other people might approach this is really hard. Like, these are all the things to be an easy founder to work with are needed to be there. And most of the time, the reason that they're not there because running a business is really hard. Like, getting investment is really hard. Keeping things going on the inside and then being externally, we're doing great, is really hard. So that's why it's really hard to work with a founder, because especially
seeing a theme here.
In a leadership role, you have to, again, like, have empathy for the situation that they're in. But again, my sense of responsibility is the people that we have. And so being a bridge, being, someone for that founder to, be open with and honest and all of that, help them, support them, guide them, coach them, and then relay that all into like the employee life cycle of that business and the culture of that business.
Definitely.
It's like bipolar. Because you have to understand both ends of the spectrum, and that's really polarizing. Whereas in a corporate, it's hard, don't get me wrong. I think the hard part about corporate is that you are just literally in a lane most of the time and you can't move along that spectrum. But you're sitting in front of someone this is their idea, this is their passion, this is their why, and you have to reason with them, understand them, have empathy for them, and sometimes it can be hard.
Yeah. I've always felt the role of the people and culture, or HR, whatever terminology we're using these days, especially in an early stage startup, is so crucial for the founder to get that person right. Because, like you said, they are that bridge between them and the human beings that actually work in that business. And I have to, because I say in every episode, the human element of a business is the most important. And that will be my signature statement for every single episode until we get to episode 2000. Chris is probably having a heart attack now, thinking, we're not doing 2000 episodes. Okay. But it's so important to have someone who sees that side. But hearing you talk that you also understand the founder's position and their mindset, that's also crucial, because you do get really good HR operators or people and culture operators who are great at their job and not necessarily great at understanding why the founder is the way that he or she is, right? So they struggle with that balance, and they struggle with trying to relay what they need to the masses, because there's a disconnect, not between that person and the people, but that person and the founder.
Yeah.
Right. The question is, does that disconnect typically come because that leader in HR or leader in people and culture doesn't understand the founder, or does that disconnect come because the founder doesn't really understand or appreciate or empower the role of the people and culture person?
Very good questions today. I think it's both. The one thing we can all agree on at Founders is that there aren't two that are the same.
Yeah.
So I genuinely get excited when you hear from, recruiters, headhunters or whatever, like the founder, they want this role, they're really invested, they know that this is important, it's the right hand role for them. Like, that's exciting for me to hear, but it's very rare. And so I think it's a bit of both. I think you have those HR people that are very much people, policy, process, let's keep everything moving whilst the founders do their job. And then I think you get those ones that realize, actually, there's kind of like two camps here. There's a founder and there's employees, and neither of them understand the other.
Yeah.
And so how can I kind of create some understanding of that? I've lost count of times I've had to tell founders, like, yeah, but they're not founders. You can give them ESOP. They're not founders.
No.
They don't get up every single day thinking like you do. And I've lost count of times I've had to tell employees, if it was your money, what would you be doing with it? Do you know what I mean? Because there is that big gulf of understanding of what a startup is. And there is such a grey area between those two kind of different ends of the spectrum. So I think it's, one, the founders don't realize how useful we can be. I don't think that they often think that HR people are business people and understand what actually is happening elsewhere. So they think, oh, well, that's the last person that I'm probably going to get to understand what I'm going through. It's going to be the COO or the CFO or the strategy guy or whatever, all of those before the people person. And I think employees sometimes think the same, like, why, if I go to HR, it's because I've got a problem. And so, again, a good HR person is able to create dialogue on both sides and try and message both ways. But let's be clear, they're never going to be in the same camp. It's never going to be the founder and employees sitting in the same place, in my opinion, anyway.
Outside of the initial points that I mentioned, what is the most pivotal reason for a pre-seed, seed round, Series A startup requiring a chief people officer in your eyes?
For two reasons. One, I think the sooner that a founder can start thinking like a chief people officer, the better. And the sooner that...
Why is that?
Because I think leadership across the board now has to have its CPO mind. like, I think a COO with a CPO mind is the best thing you can ever find. Like, literally. And I think a CEO with a CPO mind is equally the same. And if you don't bring that mindset in early enough, then you will make mistakes. You will hire the wrong people. You won't hire quick enough. You won't fire quick enough. You will do all of those things that create really difficult things to undo when you bring this CPO in. And then you spend your time as a CPO undoing work rather than doing work.
Yeah.
So that's, for me, the reason why I think getting the leadership team thinking like that. But ultimately, I just think a CPO, if they have the right experience, obviously, can bringing the right talent at the right time. Sometimes you do have to overhire if it's the right person, because you can see that they can rough it for 6 months and then they'll have what they needed. Sometimes you have to underhire and place a bet on someone that can grow with you at the speed that you're doing. And that's really difficult to do, and it's very subtle, and I think a lot of startups don't do that. They either do one or the other. They overhire and it goes wrong, or they underhire and you just can't move quick enough with that.
I sit on a seat where I'm privileged to get a lot of information from a lot of companies in the region, and I'm left scratching my head more often than not about some business decisions and some hiring decisions. And going on pretty much what you were talking about, when a business is deciding to bring in someone like yourself, my initial question before anything about the job specifics is, why do you want this person in your business? And I would be lying if I was to tell you that I'd be convinced by the answer more often than not.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like, I feel like I'm bashing founders here, right? But I'm one myself, right? So like it feels like they read off a textbook slogan sort of book sort of thing where they say, we need to be like this and we need to be like this, and I need to be people led, right? I need to have a people mindset, a human mindset, as a founder, as a leader. So my decision is, I'm going to bring in someone who can help me do that. But that's all they know. They don't know anything else. They've read this, they've heard it on a podcast, and they've said, okay, that's what I should be. But they haven't gone into the depth as to why that is the case, right? So they have a very surface level understanding of bringing in someone like you is the right thing to do. But then once you're in, they have zero clue how to actually help you achieve what essentially that surface level idea should set out to achieve.
Yeah.
Right? How do you overcome that? Because I'm not in your role, okay? I try to put people like you in those roles, but how do you, as the person in that role, overcome it when you step foot after you've had those interviews and after you feel like this is an amazing business, the leadership team are just really approachable and they're passionate and I can buy into them and so forth, and then 2 weeks into that role you just realize, holy moly, they have zero clue what people and culture is in this organization. They have no EVPs, they have no employee brand, nothing at all whatsoever, and they don't even know how to get there or even kind of want it. How do you do your role then?
Yeah, it's a lot of soul searching. I think, how do you do your role then? I think the thing to remember in our role when you go into a scenario like that is that you're not going to be changing the world in your first 6 months. You have to remember that actually this is a preventative hire, as in they're hiring you now to prevent things that they haven't done yet.
Yeah.
So
it's brilliant.
That's how I talk to myself about it, which is like, you're not gonna, change the world in 6 months. You're not going to be creating things that everyone externally wants to hear about. You're going in there to actually just keep things going, but avoid the mistakes that if you weren't there would happen. And I know I keep saying it, but I think hiring is just one of those ones. And I think it's also important to remember that there isn't anybody out there that hasn't made a bad hire. We've all done it. And we've all done it for the obvious reasons that we lecture everybody else about, because you get sucked in by people. That's just the nature of it.
100%.
But I think if you can remember that if I wasn't here, this probably wouldn't have happened, or they might have done this instead. I think just remembering that for the first part of it, it's going in and just setting expectations to the business of what building and scaling a people or an organization is. And it's, being able to attract the right people. The recruitment process for me is just like such an important thing. Like, again, we've all been through really bad processes and we've all been through great ones. Even if we haven't got it, we remember that process. And then I think it's about enabling the business, because you're not there to do the role of the CEO when it comes to hiring. It's not about you attracting all the talent and making all the talent decisions. It's about how do you pass on some of the skills that you've learned about how to spot the right people for you. Because, I can't hire for a CFO because that CFO will be completely different to me, and they know how they work. They know the type of people they need in their team. And if they don't, that's your role. So I think it's just a lot of messaging to the external world about getting the simple things right consistently. And then that just builds the behavior, and therefore you can then move on to the more value add things. That's the approach that I tend to take. But it's hard because people are like, well, why do I need someone at your level to tell me the obvious?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. I haven't overcome that yet. Like, I haven't, nailed that in a world where I could go into any role and everyone be like, oh yeah, we get why she's here. So internally, it's that I do know how to do my job.
Yeah.
I know I'm supposed to be here. I know that this is the right time for this role. And I know that I am preventing things that, if I wasn't here, would be, not doing them any favors in 6 to 12 months' time. So it's mental.
But do you think generally, whether they're founders, whether they're CEOs from large corporates, whether they're board members and so forth, do you think they have a genuine, accurate grasp of what the people and culture leadership role should be in their business, and are they fully supportive of it? Because I'll be completely honest, I speak to a lot of people like yourself who hold these roles, whether they are in different verticals, and I just get a feel that there's just not enough that they're probably allowed to do or encouraged to do to have an impact on those businesses. Where, again, I'm gonna beat this drum until I die. Okay, you're responsible for the people side of that business, and without people, that business ceases to exist. So whether you have a high churn and you've got this revolving door in your office, or whether you've just got a toxic culture, or a combination of both, or you don't even know how to actually onboard people and that they don't even join you, and you've got all these chaotic sort of things. Like what you're saying, you're stopping things from happening. And you probably said it 3 or 4 times so far in this conversation. And that's what I feel like it is. I feel like a lot of the time, especially in this region, the people and culture role isn't what it should be. It's more of, I'm going to prevent things from happening, or put the fire out when the fire does start, as opposed to, I'm going to help you grow this business. I'm going to help you change this business, drive it forward, because I'm such a crucial member of this leadership team, because I'm responsible for the engine of this business, which is the heartbeat, the human beings.
Yeah. No, I think the irony that it presents is, like, I've been in businesses where the mistakes have been made. And so in a sense, it's easier to display why I'm here and how I'm supporting and enabling those mistakes not to happen.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be there, because that's hard too and painful. And so I think being able to put the things in process to prevent them, like I said earlier, enabling others, I think that is the key to demonstrating to the business and to founders. Yeah, of course. But to be honest with you, it's not just startups, like corporate.
No, absolutely.
Any business doesn't understand or value to the level that they should the HR role. But I think it's also on us in our roles to move with what the changes that we want in our founders and our leadership team, we need to drive that. It's not going to happen whilst we just sit there and they wake up every day and think, oh, actually, that's a really important role. It's not. And if you think it is, you're going to be bored in your role for a very long time. Yeah, exactly. So I think it really is our responsibility to push those boundaries. And it means doing things that I sometimes sit there and I'm like, why am I doing this? But I think sometimes you have to put yourself out there. You have to show how things should be being done, even if it isn't your role. And again, like, the one thing that we haven't spoken about here is just that dynamic with you and that founder or that leader, if it's in corporate, like the trust that needs to be within that dynamic, and that chemistry is the key to success for a CPO or any HR person, to be honest with you. If you can't be brave with this person, then you won't be able to push those boundaries and move things forward. So yeah, it comes back to us, but also being able to demonstrate or consistently message. Like, I think I do this a lot and I have to be a lot better, is that I just assume that people get the value. And I've learned the hard way that you have to consistently blow your own trumpet and say, not in a like, I told you so.
No, but you do.
If I wasn't here, that would have happened. Well, I do it to myself and to my friends. I don't do that at work. And I think you have to consistently say, like, you know, that's why we have to do this, or that's why, you know, I should be involved in this process, or that's why we do things, you know. So it's a consistent PR process.
I find this with we have so many like varieties of clients that we work with, okay, and without a doubt, if I was to segment them in, you know, the categories of success, the one thing that the hugely successful accounts that we've had over the years is the relationship that either myself or my team have with the people that we're dealing with in that organization. So like you mentioned, the people and culture and the founder, or the people and culture and the business leader relationship, the dynamic is crucial to whether or not that role can be successful. It's the same thing for external recruitment partners. Is it in a sense, we are brought in because they know they have to use it because they don't have the capability or, you know, the capacity to be able to fill these jobs. So they bring us in, half the time reluctantly. It's almost like through gritted teeth. How do I have to use these guys? You know, and it's like, and we notice that. Not that because we're sensitive, you know, and we're just like very thin skinned, but we actually do notice when we're not wanted there. Just from the conversation back and forth, the reluctance to making themselves available when we need to clarify a few things and so forth, right? And like, people need to understand, we have been doing this for a while. We know this. We know that if you can't make time for me, you're not going to make time to be able to interview these candidates, present really well, sell them on the opportunity, on yourself and your personality and so forth. So we're running a dead race here.
Yeah.
Because we might find great people for you, but we're not going to get to the end goal, which is you hiring people and us placing people with you. And I have a client once who, when I first met him, he's the CEO of a consultancy. And I sat down with his HR team first, and he came in afterwards, and he's like, we have one shared goal. You want to place people and I want to hire people. Give me people and I will hire them. And I said, okay, right, show me the process. Show me what you're actually doing to actually put them through stage 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Now, he's lucky that he has a very good HR team who are very thorough and they run this process really well. Okay. So now I can appreciate that statement because there's a body of work beneath it. But if he was just to come in and say that, I'm like, come on, that's a load of rubbish. Because you're just saying that to me because you think that's what I need to be motivated because I'm going to make my commission. And that's not how we operate, right? So it is the relationship. And as long as they believe that we are not chasing an invoice, that we are more sort of focused on the long-term success of that business, and by doing that, we're giving them great people to actually drive that business forward. And on the reverse, as long as they respect and appreciate what we bring to the table, that relationship will work, and they will see us work so hard for them because there's that little word appreciation, because we know that they are valuing what we're actually doing. So we will work 10 times harder.
Yeah.
We will scour the earth for these people and make sure and qualify them more than ever to make sure that we are giving them absolute quality, just because of that dynamic, that relationship.
Yeah, an important thing here, I think, is also I've seen it. I've done it too. I've made this mistake. I think it's super important to realize that the world isn't fair, and that a CEO, again, or a founder or a leader or anyone, a business partner that you're working with, doesn't wake up every day thinking about how can I make Kelly's life easier. And so or like, how can I make this the perfect dynamic? They just don't. And so I've seen it so many times and I've done it. But like, why should I put that effort in? Like, he's my boss. He needs to come and drive that relationship. And it's just like completely naive. And I've seen it as well when we've hired senior people before and they think that, you know, the CEO should be scrambling to, you know, build that rapport. Of course, it's a two-way thing, but it's never 50-50. There's always one person that's exerting more effort to get that right. And I had to like get out of my stubborn self for a second and be like, well, actually, if I put this effort in, I benefit.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I need to think about it, because I'm not benefiting right now from sitting back and being stubborn and thinking, you know, he needs me more. So I think that's an important thing, that if that dynamic isn't right, like, what are you doing to enable it? And there are times where you just can't do anything. And, you know, I've been in that situation as well. But I think knowing that you have tried everything to get the dynamic where it needs to be to enable you.
I love that point. That self-reflection and looking internally first. I mean, we had this thing years ago. I had a CEO who I've mentioned a couple of times on previous episodes. She was the best leader I've ever worked for, and she had this thing where consultants in general in our industry get frustrated with clients or candidates, and they seem to think that it's everyone else's fault why something doesn't happen. Right? It's just an innate thing that they have, and everyone has the same personality trait, right? And it's hard to teach them to say, hang on a second. Yes, there might be circumstances where the client is responsible for not hiring that candidate, or where the candidate is responsible for not taking that job that they should have taken, and so forth. Let's just put that aside for a second, and let's just look at our own internal process in how we've managed the process from end to end. And did we miss something? And it was mentioned like it's like a science, right? So you think back to your high school science days, and I know we're going far back now, right? It's too far. But like you're there with all the chemicals, and then the science teacher says, put the blue one in there first, and then you got to mix it with something else, light it up with the Bunsen burner and so forth, right? But one step too early, or you go with something else with the wrong chemical, and then all of a sudden it's explosion, right? I believe the recruitment job is the most simplest job out there, which is why it's a very low entry point. That anyone can do it. But the challenge with it, which is where it becomes difficult, is that there are 101 steps from A to Z to complete the process. And people believe once they get into a bit of a rhythm and momentum that they can skip 13 or 27 steps of those and not dot those I's and cross those T's. And then all of a sudden, look around and say, why is the process falling down? And then the first thing they do, because human beings would like to sort of deflect and blame other people for problems, is they will say, it's the client's fault, what a drainer, they didn't want to sort of hire, or the candidate's fault, what an absolute time waster, and so forth. When in reality, we cut the corners.
Yeah.
We didn't qualify that candidate properly in our screening process. We didn't qualify that brief from the client. We didn't manage the actual debriefing from the actual interview process and see the alarm bells that the candidate was not going to accept 40,000. They actually wanted 47. But we were just going in there with a mindset of maybe just try and push it through and hope that no one else, sort of picks up on this, and then in the end they get convinced. And when it falls down, they don't take that responsibility. So based on that self-reflection, I think this is the hardest skill to teach. I've spoken with previous guests about emotional intelligence and so many other sort of topics when it comes to leadership and just mindset. But self-reflection is so hard because it's so confronting, because you're looking at yourself and you're looking at where you could have done better first before you're even looking external. Do you think that in your job, you can probably do a lot more when it comes to sort of helping staff sort of realize this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I do that every day.
Yeah.
Literally.
That was a very long question, by the way. I mean, I went
Yeah,
on for
but
like
it's a great
five
one. No,
minutes.
I was with you, don't worry. Yeah, I think it's what I naturally do in conversations anyway. And like I think one thing that I have been really good at in most of the roles that I've been in is like building that rapport and trust with people outside of the C-suite as well, or
Yeah.
that next layer down that are probably the most frustrated in any
Yeah, of
organization
course.
because they're probably doing all the work and getting no empowerment, acknowledgement, recognition, and all of that. And I think one of the things that I consistently find myself saying is that, okay, but what have you done? Like, because it is natural to, like I said earlier, to expect somebody else to make the effort. And I'm very good at playing devil's advocate for other people naturally.
Yeah.
I hate it when it's done for me. But I think it is teaching people. I think my role when you're developing leadership skills and people of the future is teaching them how to get through this stuff on their own.
Yeah.
Because they need mechanisms of how to cope with people. That's how people advance. Let's be honest. Like you get to a certain point where it's not your talent anymore, it's your people skills. And one of the well-known things about people that kind of get promoted and succeed is their managing up ability. Blowing your own trumpet.
So true.
Telling people what you've done, even though it's probably not that exciting. But people remember it. People think when there's a conversation going on, oh, remember, da da da. Oh, yeah, you're always top of mind. Like positioning yourself to be top of mind is like one of the skills I think. Again, I'm not very good at it, but I know how to tell other people to do it.
Yeah.
So I think I do it all the time. I think it is the hardest thing. But again, it comes back to that trust and dynamic. Like if I don't have a trusting relationship with someone, I am more tentative about how brave I can be with them and ask them those challenging questions. And again, I've been in those situations where I've needed to have a really good dynamic with someone and I haven't, and it's like it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But I've learned from it, and then the next challenging person I find, hopefully, I can do something different and do it. But to answer your question, long answer to your long question. I think it's critical for anyone's self-development, but also in our role to enable others to develop, to be talking to themselves and develop themselves.
Yeah. I'm going to coin that phrase of it's not your talent, it's your people skills, because I think that is, I don't think many even know that, many even see it that way. You know, it's something that I think when I post this and launch this episode, I think it's going to be in the actual write-up as a quote, because it is so crucial to understand that yeah, talent gets you to a certain degree, your skill set gets you to a certain degree, but how you network and how you manage and how you interact, that's everything.
Yeah.
Whether it's managing up, managing down, managing, and that's why I believe those 360 sort of assessments are actually quite useful for a lot of people that are in that sort of middle to senior management and above, just to give them that sort of clarity and that understanding, that full transparency on where they sit and how they're perceived and so forth. Because you go through a decade of your career oblivious to what you're actually doing and how you're rubbing people the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. And then think, why aren't I achieving? I'm great at my job. You are, but you're not great at the people side.
Yeah.
And business requires you to be great with people. Otherwise, there's going to be a real struggle there, right? So, love that. You mentioned earlier scaling businesses and so forth. What is your sort of recommended strategy when it comes to scaling a business and the sort of crucial elements of, make sure these boxes are ticked off before we actually start scaling?
Yeah. I think you have to start in most places with what's the vision, like what does scaling mean? Does it mean going from 200 to 400, from 200 to 1,000? Like what does it mean? Is it multi-country, etc.? So what are the actual parameters around that scale that you want to achieve? And then I think it's around, okay, but what does the success factor of that look like? Is it around systems? Is it spending less money? And then for me, it's having the right people in those critical roles. Like, I just don't think you can scale a business if your leadership team isn't where it needs to be, or a team that will scale with you. So it's leadership team first for me. But then the layer that I fondly mentioned earlier, the most frustrated, I think that is the bit that most startups forget.
Yeah.
So it's great. They've hired all these amazing like senior people, and then there's a gulf of knowledge, experience, execution abilities, etc.
Yeah.
And so that layer is the one. So leadership first, but then concentrate on this layer.
Yeah.
Like, don't do anything until you have the people that can actually think and scale with you. Because that leadership team is not going to want to do that. They won't be able to do that because they'll be doing hopefully more strategic things. And so you can't expect the people that you hired early on to have that scaling mindset and know how to get there. There will always be exceptions, of course. So it's that middle layer for me. And I think a lot of companies get that wrong. They think they can scale with a really successful leadership team and the 30, 40, 50 people that they hired before and just do more of the same. You can't. You have to build that capability.
I sat with a client, I think it was the start of last year, and they said to us, we wanted to hire 60 people in, I think it was like 3 months or 6 months, right? It was like tech, data, and product, right? So it was software engineering, it was data, and it was product, 20 in each. And we looked at all the vacancies, they were all signed off and so forth. And I said, okay. And I worked it back. So I reverse engineered it based on how many people they're going to have to interview on the first stage. You go to the second stage and then get to the final stage. They'll offer 60 people and then close them off. And then I showed them these numbers. I said, you're going to have to interview X amount of people. I said, do you have the time in your calendars to do this as you're growing business and so forth? And they're like, we can't do this. And I'm like, well, do you want 60 people or do you need 60 people?
Yeah.
Right. So this process went on back and forth for like a couple of months in trying to identify who they were going to use and partner with. Now, I'm happy to walk away from any of these pitches when I believe the outcome is not going to be achieved because I don't want to put my name to a failed project. So we stepped away. They went with another agency like 3 or 4 weeks later. And I caught up with the chief of staff probably 9 months afterwards, right? And we had a bit of a chat. And I said, what happened? He's like, oh, it was an absolute nightmare. We hired 12 people and we sent the agency out for like 10 weeks. We asked for a refund. They wouldn't give us a refund because we paid them all up front. It was like a RPO type sort of outsource sort of model and things like that. Like you hired 12. I'm like, do you think it was their fault? He's like, oh, they didn't give us enough sort of people. I'm like, how many people did you interview? And he gave me the numbers. It was like a fraction of what I actually told them was the required numbers, right? Because if you're going to hire 60 people, you're probably going to have to interview anywhere from 3 to 5 first interviews on each role, right? So that's 180 to 300 candidates you're going to interview in a short time period. That's a full-time job for your line managers, for your CTO, for your chief data officer, and so forth, right? So it was never going to happen. Now, 12 is probably still lower than what I thought was actually possible. All right. So maybe the product wasn't right, like the actual quality of candidates. But that was a huge alarm bell. Is that they don't understand. They may have strategized, like you said, that we need these people or we want these people in the role for our scale and so forth. And I get that. You've probably done the work behind the scenes with your HR and talent team and worked out this is what we need and this is what we're going to go to market for. But then you missed the most important element, I think, when it comes to the recruitment side, which is how are we going to do the recruitment?
The phasing of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, you're not just throwing people in, you're selling a different dream, but like thing, because people are joining a bigger company. They expect career development. They expect a trajectory, and it can't just always be me to C level.
No.
Because do you know what happens then? They think their next job is the C level. Like, how many conversations you have to have about that? No, you might have been here for 2 years, but you're not there after 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So building the capability there just creates a number of things. Less pressure for the C-suite to do it. They get to build their own teams, which is another thing I think companies do really wrong. Just like throw a load of headcount at it, and then you've got all these people that don't make a team because you've hired just people. You haven't built teams. You have gone into just having more people without the vision of how do I make a career at this organization, because I can't see it because the structure doesn't support it. Scale is not just about a number, it's how.
That's brilliant. We're going to finish off with a question. It's a very spontaneous question. I'd like to do this now. I started it probably 2 or 3 episodes ago.
Okay.
And so this might be a crash and burn for you. I'm not too sure. Okay. But if you had your opportunity to sit down with a founder, okay, and they needed you to convince them of your role or your impact that you can have, how would you describe what is the most valuable impact you can have for he or she in that organization? I love that. I've got you a little bit.
I need to get this right.
No one's watching.
I think I would answer a question with a question, actually, which I would, and I think I've learned this recently. I would ask them, like, have I already been in the role, or I'm about to get the role?
You're at final stages.
Okay. Then I'd slightly
You're
different.
doing a live role play. I like it.
I need to know. I'd ask them what their biggest people mistake had been in the last however long their company had been going, in their eyes, just to get a feel for what they think people mistakes are. And then I would play off of that, and I would explain how that wouldn't have happened if I was in the role, or how I would have prevented that, or how I would have supported, or something like that. Because the reason I work for a great CEO now, and he is very self-aware, and within like 3 months of me joining, he said, like, oh wow, imagine if you were here a year ago, like how many things we could have prevented together. In that sense, like, you know.
But that's so nice of him to say it.
Yeah,
Right? Because
he
so
said it on all hands, like,
yeah.
the one mistake that I have, not the only one, but one mistake that I have made is not hiring this role earlier.
Yeah.
And so we joke about it now, but like at the time I was like, wow, that's super reflective, insightful for him, and that was important for me to hear, because you don't hear it
reassuring. Absolutely.
But I'd like to know, and I think that's how I'd sell it, because I mean, I'm being a bit strategic here as well. I'm trying to get this role, so I'd want to play to something that would be meaningful for them, but I'd like to also see if they have that insight around what's probably, and it would 9 times out of 10 it's normally super trivial, but it's a thorn in their side. So that's what I would do.
That's brilliant. Look, I've really enjoyed this. I mean, I knew that it was going to be a good one when we caught up a few weeks ago. I mean, speaking about a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is, the importance of the people and culture side of a business. I think you are a great ambassador to actually speak about that, because your passion just shone through on this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on board. And you didn't get stupid, which is even better as well on that question. So you actually did really well. So in a few weeks' time, when this goes live, we'll put it out there for everyone to learn.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.